Have you ever wondered what freedom really means? Not the kind written on paper, but the kind you feel deep in your bones. Imagine being a young woman trapped in a world where love meant chains, where family meant ownership, and where your voice was never meant to matter. Now imagine running into the vast wilderness, chased by soldiers, storms, and shadows of your past, only to find, against all odds, a people who teach you that choice, not fear, defines your worth. But what would you do if you were her? Would you cling to safety, or risk everything for love that doesn't cage you, but lifts you higher? Could you choose to stay when leaving might mean survival? Could you trust someone who swears he'd rather die than hurt you? This isn't just a love story. It's about resilience, dignity, and the courage to claim your own future. If you've ever faced a moment where fear and freedom pulled you in opposite directions, this tale will speak to your heart. The sun sank low across the high plains territory, turning the horizon into a blaze of copper and fire. Eliza Hart's bare feet tore against the hardened soil, leaving a trail of blood among the tall, dry grass. Her dress, once pale as cream, now hung in tatters around her legs, streaked with dust and bruises. She had been running since before dawn, slipping away while the cabin still lay quiet and her father's heavy snores rattled the walls. Behind her was the town of Mercy Gulch, a place where promises of salvation rang hollow. The preacher spoke of duty and obedience, yet his eyes wandered shamelessly, and her father bartered her future away. The land stretched endlessly before her, vast and pitiless. Hawks circled above, their cries lost in the wind. Wolves, snakes. The cruel heat, these dangers felt merciful compared to a wedding forced upon her by Abel Hart. She stumbled but pressed forward, thirst clawing at her throat. Then came another sound, not her pursuers from town, but the steady rhythm of hooves rolling from the north. Her heart lurched. A lone rider emerged over a ridge, framed by the sinking sun. His long black hair whipped in the wind. His leather shirt carried the marks of careful handiwork, and his posture spoke of strength honed over years in the saddle. He halted his paint mare 20 paces away. His dark eyes studied her with calm depth. Then he lifted his hand, palm open, a gesture that needed no translation. "You are hurt," he said in careful English, voice deep and steady. Eliza tried to answer, but her throat betrayed her, yielding only a rasp. The world tilted around her. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, taller than she expected, his frame lean yet powerful. From his saddle, he drew a water skin and approached with the patience of a hunter easing toward wounded prey. She grasped it with trembling hands, gulping greedily until he pulled it back with a soft warning. Up close. He looked younger than she had imagined, perhaps 30 winters, a thin scar cutting above his brow. His eyes held no cruel hunger, only a quiet judgment, as though he read the story written in her ragged clothes and bloodied feet. "Please," she whispered, "I cannot go back. I will not." She nodded, tears streaking the dust on her face. "My father. Others. They'll make me." The words failed her. He returned to his horse and withdrew a blanket and strips of soft leather. "Feet first," he instructed, kneeling before her. She sat, hesitant, while he washed and bound her torn soles with practiced care. "Eliza," she murmured. "Eliza Hart." He repeated her name slowly, as if weighing it. "Where do you run?" She faltered. The question had no easy answer. "I don't know. Just away." Her heart pounded. Everything she had ever been told branded him dangerous. Yet those same voices had led her here bruised, barefoot and desperate. She placed her hand in his. He lifted her easily, draped the blanket over her shoulders, and set her gently upon his horse. Instead of climbing behind her, he led the mare north on foot, toward a distant line of cottonwoods. "Rest," Chayton said, helping her down. "I will make fire." Eliza sank onto the buffalo robe inside, watching as he tended his horse with calm, steady hands. Flames sparked and grew, licking at the gathered wood until a small blaze threw golden light across the trunks. Shadows swayed like dancers while sparks lifted into the cooling sky. Chayton stepped into the dark and returned with a pot filled with fresh water from Cottonwood Run. From his pack he drew dried meat, roots, and herbs, dropping them into the pot until a thin stew began to scent the air. "Eat, then sleep," he said, seating himself cross-legged across from her. "Tomorrow we ride for my people's camp. There you will have clothes made for travel." The words should have comforted her, yet unease crept up her spine. "Your people," she murmured. "But I am white. Would they not?" Her voice trailed off, caught between fear and weariness. Eliza clutched the blanket tighter. "I cannot be family. I will not belong to anyone again." For the first time since they met, the hard line of his mouth softened into what might have been a smile. Lakota women are not possessions. They walk their own path. If a woman no longer wishes her husband, she may place his belongings outside the lodge, and he is gone. He stirred the pot with calm patience. "You could learn our ways, mend, and then choose for yourself what future you want, and if men come hunting for you." His face darkened. "They will learn the Lakota protect those in their care." They ate together, the stew simple yet warming, filling her hollow stomach. Silence stretched, but it was not the heavy silence of her father's cabin, nor the tense silence of Garrett Pike's presence. This was companionable, broken only by the crackle of fire and the distant calls of coyotes and owls. Her eyelids drooped, but she fought sleep, long trained to remain alert. "Rest," Chayton said gently. "I will keep watch. All night." And so, Eliza Koo, who had not known true rest in years, curled on the buffalo robes and slept while a warrior kept vigil. The sounds of the prairie did not terrify her. For once, she dreamed not of fists or vows spoken at the altar, but of running toward something unnamed, something waiting beyond the horizon. Morning broke with the chatter of birds. Panic seized her until memory returned the escape, the fire, the promise of safety. Through the shelter's opening, she saw Chayton still seated by the ashes of the fire, his posture unchanged, though weariness shadowed his eyes. Eliza tested her bandaged feet, pain still sharp but bearable. She hobbled to the stream, finding a private bend shielded by a fallen log. The water bit cold against her skin, yet it washed away grime and fear alike. Vulnerability clawed at her, being alone and exposed in the wild, but necessity pushed her on. When she returned, Chayton had laid out a leather dress, moccasins, and strips of cloth. "My sister's," he explained. "She has many. She will not mind." "Better," he said simply. Approval lingered in his tone, though restrained. He had already packed the shelter with practiced speed, securing it to the mare. "Can you ride? I can," she admitted softly, "though I have little experience." He lifted her onto the horse, then mounted behind her. She stiffened, bracing for the closeness of men she had always dreaded. But he kept his distance, steadying her only when needed. They rode north beneath the rising sun, grassland giving way to scattered pines and low hills. He guided without hesitation, though she saw no trail. He paused often, scanning the horizon, letting her sip water, teaching her patience in travel. At a resting place beneath a broad boulder, she gathered courage to ask, "Why do you help me?" Eliza's voice trembled. "Is she still alive?" "No," he answered softly. "She died 5 winters ago. But she lived free. She chose her path." His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "All people deserve this to choose. Everything has spirit," he said. "Take only what you need. Give thanks. Then the earth gives again." His words stood in sharp contrast to Abel Hart, who had taken without care, who had ruled by greed and fists. Eliza felt something awaken in her, a hunger to understand this other way. "What is it?" she whispered. "Smoke," he said. "Not cooking smoke." "Wrong." He dismounted, easing her down. "Stay with the horse." His gaze measured her. Then he gave a single nod. Together they crept uphill, crouching low behind juniper brush. At the crest, he dropped flat, signaling her to do the same. Below lay a meadow scarred by violence. A wagon lay burned, smoke curling from its frame. 2 bodies sprawled nearby, arrows jutting cruel from their backs. "Crow," Chayton muttered. "Reading signs?" She could not. "War party. 6, maybe 7. Past 2 hours ago." "Are they still near?" she whispered. The meadow stretched silent, but for the caw of distant birds. Death lingered heavy in the air. Eliza shivered, gripping the blanket tighter. For the first time, she realized her fate lay tangled with his, the warrior who walked beside her. And in that moment, for all her fear, she felt safer with him than she had ever felt in Mercy Gulch. Eliza glanced behind them again and again, expecting a shout or the glint of metal in the sun. Nothing moved on the lower flats. The stillness only sharpened her sense that danger lived in the unseen places, not only in Mercy Gulch with Abel Hart and Garrett Pike, but in old rivalries between peoples she barely understood. She kept her questions to herself and watched how Chayton moved. He rode as if listening with his whole body, letting the land speak through the soles of his moccasins and the ears of his mare. Dusk painted the hills in violet and rust before he stopped at a shallow cave that opened like a mouth in the bluff. It was deep enough to drink in their small fire, yet open enough that they could see the slope below. Chayton worked quickly. He checked the wind so smoke would drift upward and vanish among stones. He gathered dry wood that would burn hot with little smoke. He led the mare to a shelf where scrub grass grew and let her crop in peace. His movements were spare and watchful, as if wasted motion might cost them more than time. "We will not reach my people today," he said. "Too dark, too dangerous. We rest here and leave at first light." "Your sister's dress," she said at last, looking down at the soft leather that now moved with her instead of binding her. "Will she be angry that you gave it to a stranger? A white woman?" "Leah will be glad," he said. "She says I stare too long at old hurts. She tells me to look for good again. Helping you will prove her right." "I had a wife," he answered, his voice the same quiet tone he used to read tracts. "Soldiers came at dawn 4 summers ago. They fired into lodges while children slept. Willow snow did not rise again." Eliza closed her eyes a moment. "I am sorry." They sat without speaking. The cave mouth framed a strip of sky where the first cold stars appeared. Eliza felt the placement of his body between her and the opening. It was not possessive. It was a posted guard, a line set down against the world. She tried to remember the last time a man had stood for her without asking anything in return. She could not. "Tomorrow," he said after a time, "we reach my people. My uncle's lodge stands near the edge of camp. He is chief. He will remember how my mother came to us and became a beloved sister and daughter. He will speak for you. And you, she asked, what will the others say when you bring a white woman into their circle? The plainness of the promise almost unraveled her. In Mercy Gulch, every offer of protection had been a coin traded for obedience. Here, the coin was thrown away. She swallowed. I do not know how to thank you. Live free, he said. That is enough. Dawn silvered the stone. They broke camp with the clean efficiency that came from habit. By mid-morning, the hills opened into a long valley where smoke rose in thin blue threads, and lodge poles stood in careful circles. Children ran between dogs. Women worked at hides stretched on frames. Men stood with bows unstrung, and horses at tether. The camp of Chayton's people breathed with the rhythm of a living town. The first faces turned toward Eliza with surprise and caution, but there was no anger. Curiosity parted the way as Chayton led her through to a larger lodge with painted symbols along the hide. Chief Iron Bear stepped out. The old man moved with the careful steadiness of one who carried both authority and years. Chayton spoke to him in Lakota for some time. The chief's gaze rested on Eliza while he listened. When Chayton finished, Iron Bear placed his palm over his chest and bowed his head once. He spoke a few measured words and then gestured toward the circle of lodges. Leah Morningbird reached them before Eliza could answer. She was near Eliza's age, eyes bright with humor and resolve. She took Eliza's hands and squeezed them as if greeting a cousin long unseen. Come, Leah said. We have much to do. The days that followed found a shape. In the mornings, Eliza worked beside the women. Leah taught her to scrape hides with the right pressure, so the blade cut hair but spared the skin. Too hard and the hide tore. Too soft, and the fur clung like a bad memory. Eliza learned to stitch wet sinew that would tighten as it dried. She learned to grind berries and fatten meat into a paste that kept through winter. She pricked her fingers and laughed at herself and tried again. From across the camp, she would sometimes see Chayton with younger boys, setting their stance, correcting their grip, showing the patience of a man who knew that skill grew best in quiet ground. At times he glanced her way. Heat rose in her cheeks, and she returned to her work. She crouched and looked until the ground began to reveal itself. 2 sizes of deer prints, she said, unsure. The smaller on top, a fawn trailing its mother. He nodded once, and the small glow of pride carried her forward. How long ago? Good, he said. Then he walked ahead, teaching her to read broken twigs and the tilt of a blade of grass, to notice when the story of the ground shifted. Why does it matter? He asked. To find food, she said, and to know who walks near us. Friend or enemy? I can wade, Eliza said, though she knew the water would swallow her to the chest. He studied the current, then studied her. No, too dangerous. I will carry you. He did not ask permission as a courtesy, only to ignore the answer. He waited a heartbeat. When she did not refuse, he stepped close, slid one arm beneath her knees and the other across her back, and lifted with an ease that startled her. Breathe, he said, standing still. I will not harm you. The words were simple. They emptied the air of old ghosts. Eliza pulled a breath into her lungs, then another. The world steadied. She nodded once. They reached the far bank, and he set her down as if she were made of glass, not a freight he was glad to be rid of. He looked at her face to be sure the fear had not returned, then gave a single nod. Camp is not far, he said. We will dry by the fire there, and tomorrow the lessons continue. She smiled, small but real. I am ready to learn. They moved on beneath a sky scraped clean by rain. The aspen leaves shook themselves free of droplets and shimmered like coins. Somewhere ahead, smoke thinned into air, and Eliza felt the pull of a place where work and safety lived side by side. She no longer measured the hours by what she fled. She measured them by what she was learning to become. Halfway across the swollen creek, his foot slipped on a stone buried under dark water. Chayton Redhawk recovered in the same breath, drawing Eliza Hart closer to steady both of them. For an instant, her body rested against his chest. She felt the even thrum of his heartbeat, not hurried, not demanding. His strength wrapped around her like the walls of a safe house rather than iron bars. When they climbed the far bank and he set her down, she did not want to step away, surprised by the thought and by the warmth it brought to her throat. She thanked him, the words coming out on a breath that shivered. Something moved in his eyes and then disappeared. A spark banked, as if by choice. He said the camp was near and led the way. Later she sat on a robe outside the lodge she now shared with Leah Morningbird. Smoke from banked fires climbed into a clear night, and the smell of sage drifted from a nearby bundle. She asked in a quiet voice whether Chayton had loved his wife as deeply as the men said. Leah's expression softened the way a sky eases from bright to warm gold. She told Eliza that when Willow Snow died, she had feared her brother would follow her into the next world. For 2 long seasons he moved like a shadow, and only duty kept him breathing. And now, Leah added with a knowing look, he teaches a white woman to read tracks and carries her through a river. Eliza felt heat rise under her skin. She said he was only keeping a promise to keep her safe. Leah answered that her brother did not make promises. The wind could blow away. Safety and kindness are not what start a warrior's song again when he thinks no one hears. Eliza had no answer for that. Too many thoughts, he said, not as a question. They watched the stars wheel. Wind brushed the grass in long strokes. After a time, he told her she had changed. Stronger now. She said she was still learning and would never be truly Lakota. He touched his chest and said that being Lakota lived there, not in blood alone. He told her she worked hard, honored their ways, and that people saw it. She surprised herself by asking what he saw when he looked at her. Eliza confessed that she dreamed of Abel Hart finding her and dragging her back. He said simply that if her father came, he would face him, and so would all his people, for she stood under their protection now. She whispered that she did not want to bring trouble to the camp. He turned, face serious in starlight, and said that trouble comes whether people wish it or not. But a life without honor and without sheltering those who need shelter is a life not worth living. A sharp wind swept across the grass. She shivered. He lifted his blanket from his shoulders and set it around her, his hands resting a heartbeat on her arms, warm through the leather dress. He told her the night was turning cold, and they walked back toward the glow of banked fires. Wrapped in his blanket, she understood something had shifted inside her. The old fear had loosened its hold. In its place stood the first small signs of something else. Not love yet, but the ground, where love could take root. She saw that strength could be gentle, that protection could be an offered roof rather than a locked door, that honor could form a shelter instead of a cage. At the edge of camp, she thanked him for everything he had done. He dipped his head and said she thanked too much and that he simply did what was right. She knew it was more, choosing to help, to teach, to stand in the path of danger without asking for payment had shown her a kind of man she had not believed existed. She slept that night wrapped in his blanket and knew he kept watch somewhere close by. Chayton appeared at Eliza's side so quickly she had not seen him cross the ground. One hand rested on the hilt of his knife, his body coiled and ready. His voice was low and plain. "Stay close to the lodge." He moved fast toward the edge of camp where other warriors gathered, bows in hand, arrows loose but ready, bodies turned so that any approach would meet a wall. A voice cleaved the morning. "I know she is here, my daughter Eliza Hart. I have come to take her home." The words knifed through Eliza's stomach. Her blood went cold. Chief Iron Bear emerged with dignity that ignored the hour and the insult. Chayton stood at his side to carry words between tongues. The chief asked why armed white men came to a quiet camp. Abel Hart spat tobacco juice so near the chief's feet that the insult needed no translation. He said they came for stolen property. Stolen. He pointed straight at Eliza, who had stepped forward despite Chayton's warning. "That one is my daughter. She was taken by your savage." Eliza heard her own voice and was surprised by its strength. "I was not taken. I ran. I chose to leave." Chayton said in a cold voice that white law did not hold power here. Abel Hart's hand went toward his pistol. He said the men would hand Eliza over or else. He never finished. Chayton's knife flashed into the morning. Around them, Lakota bows lifted in smooth unison, and arrows slid to strings. Chayton stated the count. "You are 5. We are many. You threaten one under our protection." Garrett sneered and said that Eliza was a white woman living among savages, and that good Christians had a duty to save her from defilement. Anger swept through Eliza and burned the last of her fear to ash. "The only defilement I have known lived in your Christian town," she said. "These people have shown me more kindness and respect than I ever found among my own kind." Abel Hart cursed that he did not care about their ways. He threw himself from the saddle and stomped toward Eliza. Chayton moved to intercept, but Eliza stepped forward first. The ground under her feet felt steady. She said no. The words set the shape of the morning. Her father blinked, not used to hearing such a word from his daughter. She said it again. "No, I will not go with you. You have no power over me in this place." He barked that he was her father. She answered that a father protects and cherishes, and that he had done neither. She told him she chose to stay with people who understood honor. His hand rose to strike. Chayton caught his wrist mid-air and held it without effort. He said Abel Hart would not touch her here or ever again. For a breath, the morning held its own. Then Garrett Pike made a choice his rage demanded. Seeing a Lakota warrior defend the woman he believed belonged to him, he drew his pistol. Bowstrings thrummed. An arrow split the hat from Garrett's head. His horse reared, and he fought the reins. More arrows drove into the dust at the hooves of the Mercy Gulch men, until the animals danced in panic. Abel Hart jerked free and back toward his horse, eyes burning. He said it was not over. He would return with cavalry and burn the camp to reclaim his property. Chayton said they would find nothing because the Lakota moved like wind and the soldiers were slow and loud. Another of the white men shouted that they were making war on the United States. Leah Morningbird stepped forward, her English careful but firm. "We make war on no one," she said. "We protect a woman who asked for help. If this is a crime in your world, then your world is broken." Eliza stood very still, and then her body shook. The fear that had been pushed down by anger came roaring back to claim its due. Chayton's hand found her elbow. He told her she had been brave. She said she had been terrified. He said courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act anyway. He looked at her and told her that Abel Hart would try again. She knew he was right. She said she had brought danger to the people who had given her shelter and that maybe she should leave so trouble followed only her. "No," he said, the word sharp with an edge she had not heard from him before. He eased his tone. "No. Running is finished. You have stood and chosen. We will stand with you." The moment passed into work because that is what keeps people alive. Lodges began to come down. Poles were lashed into traveling bundles. Meat was packed tight. Waterskins were filled. Every motion carried the practiced speed of those who had moved before the weight of soldiers. Eliza worked with Leah, folding and binding, hands keeping pace with fear so fear had no room to grow. When Chayton came to them, his face held the look of a man already listening for hooves on the wind. He told them that scouts had gone and would signal if the soldiers left Fort Grey Rock. If they came, the band would break apart and move in streams that could meet again. He looked at Eliza. He told her this was not her fault. She started to protest, and he cut the air with his hand. "The men from Mercy Gulch brought this trouble, not you. You bring life where grief took root." She wanted to ask what he meant and did not find the words. The day edged forward. Smoke thinned and coals were buried. Children were lifted to travail. Eliza watched the camp she had begun to love fold itself into motion, like a bird tucking its wings for flight. The prairie looked the same as it had at dawn, and yet it felt changed, charged like iron before lightning. She rose quietly and stepped outside. The sky was a black river with bright stones scattered across it. Chayton stood near the shadow line, watching the dark. He did not turn as she approached. He said he could hear her steps now, each person having their own sound. She said she would learn to walk more quietly, and he said that would come. She told him she was afraid, and that the fear felt different from before. It no longer came from cages and fists. It came from the thought of losing what she had found. He said that fear could be honorable when it guarded something worth keeping. He told her that what had begun today would not end soon, but that the Lakota had faced long pressure before and still stood. They stood in silence and let the night breathe around them. Somewhere a coyote called and another answered. The sound did not frighten her. It sounded like a song for the living. She went back to her bed and slept. In the gray before dawn, the scouts returned. No soldiers yet. The band would move at first light toward the Moonridge Hills, where the ground rose into broken country in many places to disappear. Work began again without complaint. Poles, hides, bundles, children, horses, dogs. The machine of a people made for motion. They rolled out as the sun lifted. A long, quiet procession, the earth taking them in as if it had room for every footfall. Eliza rode beside Chayton for a time and then dropped back to help with a child who had slipped from a travois. She no longer moved like a guest. She moved like one of them. The first chapter of her new life had been written in refusal and in standing her ground. The next would be written in the long work of staying free. Evening settled on the move like a quilt laid by careful hands. The band had left the open grass for country that folded in on itself. Low ridges stitched with cedar and stone. 3 hard days of travel had carried them to a hollow that Chayton Redhawk called Eagle's Hollow, a place where wind arrived tired and left quieter than it came. Fires were kept small. Horses were ground-tied in shadow. Children played without noise, as if they already understood that quiet could be a shelter. Eliza Hart felt the day in her legs and shoulders, the kind of honest ache that came from work freely chosen. She had done her share without being asked twice, lifting poles, tying lashings, keeping pace when the band broke into smaller threads and met again at agreed signs. She knew the reason for the caution. Word had run through the camp like a taut line. Abel Hart had ridden straight for Fort Grey Rock. Soldiers might not be far behind. Chayton moved like the edge of dawn, never loud, never far. He walked the rim of Eagle's Hollow at intervals, pausing to read the cut of brush and the curve of dust where a small animal had passed. Each time he returned, his eyes checked Eliza first, as if assuring himself she was where safety could find her quickly. He did not crowd her. He did not vanish from her world. The balance made its own kind of language. At dusk, Chief Iron Bear gathered the warriors on a flat shelf of rock. Eliza stayed below with the women and older men, but she could hear snatches of talk floating on the evening. Scouts had seen no standards or blue coats, only a military wagon track heading north the previous day. If the soldiers came, they would come along the low ground. If they came, the camp would split at 3 gullies and meet again by a spring the Lakota called Coyote Mouth. The words were calm and unhurried, a plan spoken by people who had practiced survival into muscle memory. "I am," she answered. "I did not know how much there is to learn about leaving almost no sign." He nodded. "The land forgets quickly if you help it." He glanced toward the rim, then back at her. "You did not eat much at midday." He stayed long enough to see her finish, then went to walk the rim again. Leah watched him go with amusement that was not unkind. "You have put music back in his steps," she murmured. "I have not done anything," Eliza said, and Leah laughed softly. "Sometimes doing nothing but standing in your own truth is more than enough." Near dawn, Chayton touched her shoulder and she came alert without a sound. He leaned close and spoke in a voice made for night. "Scouts report dust to the south, not yet near. We move at first light." Eliza nodded and rose. In minutes, lodges came down. Hides were folded tight, poles gathered and lashed, children wrapped and lifted to travois. The band flowed from Eagle's Hollow without hurry or panic, a river that decided to use a new bed. By late morning, the day opened hot. The air smelled of wild sage and sun-baked dust. Eliza rode for a while beside Azure Shell Woman, who carried a bundle of herbs. The older woman spoke little English, but she patted Eliza's hand and said in her own tongue words that Leah later translated: "Strong heart, good eyes, walks with care." It was praise brief and precious as a bead of water on a dry day. They rested in a shallow fold where a trickle of water worked its way among stones, while the horses pulled mouthfuls of long grass. Chayton showed Eliza how to read the line where ants crossed a rock. "See how quickly they choose a new path when a stick blocks the old one," he said. "They do not waste time arguing with the stick. I am telling you that the ground gives advice if you listen," he said. "Ants know when to change route. People often insist the road owes them passage." She smiled and drank. A hawk circled overhead and tilted a wing, its shadow sliding along the stone like a brushstroke. She thought of the name Chief Iron Bear had given her and felt the name settle into her as if it had been waiting there all along. By afternoon, the land began to lift. The air cooled. Pines appeared in scattered company. Their resin sent a clean line in Eliza's mind. Chayton stopped to press his palm against the ground on a narrow trail. He closed his eyes for a moment. 2 horses, unshod, moving north yesterday, not ours. He pointed to a scuff near a stone. "See how the edge breaks forward. That was a hurry step. That is most of tracking," he said, "knowing what to look for and then teaching your eyes to find it at the right time." They moved again and reached a high bench in the late light. From there, they could see a long sweep of the high plains territory, rolling outward toward the far blue line of distance. Eagle's Hollow lay behind them, hidden as if it had never existed. Ahead lay Moonridge Hills, where the land held enough folds and cuts that a small band could vanish despite the open sky. As the camp settled, Eliza and Leah raised their small shelter. Leah laid out tools for mending. Eliza stitched a tear in a travel bag with neat, tight passes, the kind of small task that made a big difference after 20 miles. Chawan arrived with a bundle of dry sticks and set them down. He knelt and built a tidy fire that would cook without being seen from the flats below. "You have good hands," he said, watching her thread the needle. He looked at the slope and then back at Eliza. "I am going to place watchers along the ridge. If you need me, send Leah to the cedar post at that high rock." He pointed without lifting his arm high. The motion was small, controlled. Care seemed to run all the way to his fingertips. "Be safe," Eliza said. He did not answer with words, but his eyes softened. Then he climbed toward the ridge with the long stride that had first brought him over a hill and into her life. The last of the light peeled away and left a blue-gray quiet. Eliza ate a small meal and drank slow. When night fully took the slope, she lay back and watched stars come alive one by one. Wind combed the pine. She let the sound wash the dust out of her mind. Fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a fetter. It was a guardian standing alert on a ridge. At some point in the first hours of morning, the watchers heard what they had been listening for. A throb beneath the earth, faint but regular. The sound of horses moving together. A thread of dust low on the horizon, like smoke that had forgotten its purpose. The warning traveled the ridge by hand sign and soft calls. The band did not panic. They did what Chayton had said ants would do. They changed the route. Bundles went up. Fires died without a whimper. The band split along the 3 gullies agreed upon at Eagle's Hollow. Eliza followed Leah down a run of shale that slid like flour underfoot. She kept her weight over her feet as Chayton had taught her. She did not rush. She did not lag. She became another small thing in a large world that knew how to move. The third night came with a thin moon and a clean chill. They made camp in a pocket of rock that would block light from the low ground. The fire Eliza and Leah built was small but friendly. Eliza watched the flame write its bright language on the underside of a ledge and felt something ease in her chest. Chayton appeared, not as a shadow and not as a blaze, simply as the man whose absence she now noticed before her mind told her to. "We saw dust from Fort Gray Rock at a distance," he said, not certain where they turned. "We lose nothing by staying quiet another day. As long as we remember who we are," he said, "people of the moving lodge, people who live by what they can carry and what they can leave." She nodded. "I can carry more than I thought." He smiled, true and unguarded, and it reached his eyes. "I know." "Tell me something about Willow Snow," Eliza said softly, "only if it is not pain to speak it." His gaze went to the fire, then to the bare line of the ridge. She could almost see him place the memory where it would not roll and bruise new skin. "She laughed like a creek in spring," he said at last. "She fought fear like a woman who knew she deserved joy." Then he looked at Eliza. "You remind me of her when you insist on being your own person. Later, when the fire sank to red coals." Chayton rose for his watch. He placed his blanket around Eliza's shoulders the way he had done on another night under a wide sky. "Warm enough?" he asked. "Warm enough," she said, "and safe enough." Wind pushed through the pines and the sound walked the ridge above. The fire burned low, as it should on a night when a low flame was a wiser friend than a bright one. Eagle's Hollow lay behind them like a secret kept. The Moonridge Hills rose around them like a promise made of stone. Eliza closed her eyes. She did not pray for the soldiers to turn back. She did not pray for Abel Hart to break his rage on some other rock. She prayed for steady feet, clear eyes, and the courage to keep choosing her life with each step. She had learned to say no when it mattered. Now she would learn to say yes to the road that opened under her boots. Most of the band slept hard after a day of slipping through broken country and leaving little for soldiers to follow. Fires were pressed low. The hollow breathed like a big animal at rest. Eliza Hart could not sleep. She sat with a buffalo robe around her shoulders and watched the small flame fold into embers and then wake again when a breeze touched it. Chayton Redhawk stepped out of the dark the way dawn steps over a ridge. He placed 2 small branches on the coals and waited until a quiet flame took hold. Then he sat across from her. His presence did not crowd the night. It made room for it. "Your thoughts weigh more than that robe," he said. "Change moves like a storm," he said. "Fast, loud, washing the old dust off the earth. When it passes, the land looks different. It is still the same land, only clean." They listened. An owl called from the dark line of pines. Wind moved through boughs with a soft hiss. Far off, a coyote gave a thin high yip, and another answered. "Your mother learned how to breathe in a small room," he said. "She taught you what kept her alive in that room. She could not teach the feel of open air if no one ever opened a door for her." Eliza finally met his eyes. "What do Lakota women learn instead?" "Joy," Eliza repeated, testing the shape of the word in this new light. "In Mercy Gulch, joy was for songs after Sunday, not for a marriage bed. My mother pitied white women," he said. "She said many are taught to fear what should be beautiful. Among my people, women choose their husbands. If they change their mind, they can end it by placing a man's things outside the lodge. Their comfort matters. Their pleasure matters also." Heat rose to Eliza's cheeks, and still she did not look away. I have never heard a man speak of what a woman feels like it matters. Garrett Pike used to say a woman who wants that is wicked or broken. They sat with the words till the night smoothed them. Eliza stared into the fire and felt a long cliff open inside her. All the lessons she had swallowed without chewing crowded at the edge. She felt both frightened and free. "Sometimes," she said, voice low, "when you steady me or help me down from your horse, I feel a jump under my ribs. And then fear runs right over it because I was taught that feeling ends in pain." Eliza tried to fit these truths against what she had known. The pieces did not match, and yet they made a better picture. She heard her own voice say, "Thomas the blacksmith always talked about breaking a horse so it will not fight you. He said a woman needed the same lessons. Then he never knew a real horse, and he never deserved a real woman." Chayton answered, "A good horse carries you because you ask with respect and because you have learned its mind. A good woman chooses to join you because you earn it every day. There is no breaking in either place, only learning. I have strange dreams now," she said, "not of my father or of Garrett. Dreams I never allowed before. I wake ashamed of wanting anything for myself." "Shame is a chain someone else wrapped around you," he said. "You can unloop it and set it down." "How?" she asked. She studied his face in the firelight. "Even if I choose never, even if I keep distance always, even then," he said. He did not blink. "I told you I would die before hurting you. That promise includes your spirit. I will not push you past any line you draw. I have feelings. he said. I have desire. I feel it when you laugh with Leia, when you master a new skill and your eyes light, when you stand straight in front of Abel Hart and speak your own choice. These feelings belong to me. I carry them. They are not your burden. Tears threatened. Eliza had never heard a man say his wants were his to manage. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and kept very still so the moment would not break. You are not turning into someone else, Chayton said. You are uncovering who you were under the fear. And if I do not like what I uncover, if it scares me, she asked, then you face it with the same courage you have already shown a dozen times, he said. And you are not alone. That is the right way, he said. A man's arm should be a place of safety, not a threat. Your wife, she said, searching for the right path. Did she feel that with you? You must miss her still. I do. Grief is a season, not a prison. It lives with you, and then it loosens. He looked at her without flinching. She would have liked you. She would have seen your fight and called you sister. I am afraid, she said, not of you, of myself, of finding out I am not who I was taught to be. That is wisdom, not weakness. He said, change takes courage. He stood to go back to the ridge. Before he left, he touched the robe at her shoulder the way you make sure a child is tucked well. Whatever you find, he said, you stay under my protection. Whatever you choose or do not choose, you have value here. After he slipped into the dark, Eliza watched the coals a while longer. She thought of the girls in Mercy Gulch who never looked past the churchyard fence. She thought of her mother trying to hand her tools for a small room. She thought of the way Leia teased her and the way the older women corrected her with kind hands. She finally lay down and let the night take her. When the sun slid away, Chayton returned from the watchers. He sat near but not close. They shared a small supper. They spoke of simple things, of how to bind a bundle so a pony does not chafe, of how to cover boot prints with a pine bough, of what cloud shapes often meant rain in this country. He did not circle back to the night talk. He let her come to it if she wished. She did. I thought about your word joy, she said. I think fear taught me to clench against it long before there was anything to be afraid of. How do I teach it? Slow, he said, with patience, with choice, with truth told to yourself in clear words. You do not have to rush toward anything. You only have to stop running from yourself. That is a life worth building, he said, and he smiled so that the lines at the corner of his eyes deepened. You have already started. A few nights later, the band reached a fold of land that offered water, shelter, and a look back over the country they had crossed. They settled there for a short rest. Eliza spent the morning helping Azure Shell Woman gather roots. The older woman showed her how to dig with a forked stick and leave enough for next season. Everything has spirit, she said in Lakota, and Eliza answered in the words she had learned, giving thanks as the woman taught her. In the afternoon, Chayton found her near the edge of Whispering Aspen Grove, where the leaves talk even when the wind is lazy. He asked if she wanted to walk, and she said yes. They followed a deer path that showed itself only when you looked from the right height. They did not speak much. When they did, it was easy talk, the kind that keeps company with silence without crowding it. I am learning to see them, she said. He turned to her then. There was a care in his face that was not new, but there was something else under it, a question laid bare and left to breathe. Eliza felt the fear press and then ease. She stepped a little closer, not into his arms, into the space where two people meet who have both chosen to be there. He answered without moving toward her. "If you ever choose me, it will be because you are free. I will not accept any other reason." They stood there until the light changed. Then they returned to camp in companionable quiet. Leia spotted them and grinned, but said nothing loud. Days later, word came from scouts that the soldiers had turned back toward Fort Gray Rock. Perhaps the trail had grown old. Perhaps the Moonridge Hills had done their quiet work. The pressure eased, not to nothing, but to a level a body could carry and still breathe. Eliza did not run to the edge of camp and shout. She kept working. She ground corn. She stitched a torn sleeve for a child. She sat with an elder and listened to a story about buffalo that did not end where she expected. By evening, the sky filled with a wider kind of peace. She smiled, then she grew sober. "I want to say something plain, and hear it answer plain." He nodded. "Thank you for giving me time to learn my own heart. Thank you for carrying your desires as your own. Thank you for teaching me that protection can be a gift, not a chain." "You do not owe me thanks," he said, but the look in his eyes said the words landed in a place that mattered. They stood while stars came out one by one. A wind moved across the camp with the smell of water and sage. Somewhere Leia sang a teasing song under her breath, and someone laughed. The world had not become easy. It had become honest. Eliza felt it settle in her the way a proper saddle settles on a good horse. Right weight, right fit, ready to carry her forward. She looked at Chayton. "Whatever I discover next about myself," she said, "I will not run from it." He turned to go, and Eliza called after him, voice softened by the hush of the valley. "Chayton." He paused at the edge of the dark. "Thank you for seeing me as more than something to be owned or fixed or saved." He studied her a long moment, the coals lighting his face in slow red pulses. "You were never broken," he said, "only caged. And cages, no matter how stout the bars, cannot hold an eagle forever." When he was gone, the world settled into small sounds. The last threads of fire loosened into a bed of glow. Eliza sat alone with the robe snug at her throat and let doors open in her mind that had been nailed shut for years. The thought that her body was her own and not a ledger to be traded, the thought that wanting was not wicked, the thought that choice was not a sin but a birthright. Terror and thrill braided together in her chest, a new rope she did not yet know how to use, but would not let go of. The stars moved in their slow cartwheel, and the fire settled to red stones. Inside her, a first true sense of freedom woke and stretched. Not only the freedom of running from Abel Hart and Garrett Pike, but a deeper one. Freedom from the voice that had lived in her head and told her to be small and silent. She lay down with that strange peace in her and slept. By morning the band was on the move again, sliding along the spine of the Moonridge Hills, where the ground dipped and rose like the backs of sleeping buffalo. Toward midday the clouds built without drama, layer on layer, as if the sky were stacking planks. They dropped into Redwind Canyon to make time along the hard bottom where old floods had polished the stones. The trail felt choked with a tense quiet, the kind that makes a person count the steps between each breath. The first hard gust hit with grit in it. The second carried a cut of cold. By the third, the sky had folded in on itself and turned black at the seams. Rain came with a sound, like 1,000 small hooves. Chief Iron Bear lifted his arm, and the command traveled man to man and woman to woman. High ground. Now. But the wind slapped words out of mouths, and the rain drowned them before they reached the far horses. "Flash flood," Chayton shouted. He appeared at her knee, a shape cut out of rain and motion, and seized the pony's rein. The canyon will fill. We must. The rest vanished under another sound, the sharp report of gunfire skipping off stone. Through the curtain of water came figures on horses at the canyon mouth. Blue coats, slickers plastered to shoulders, hats shoved low, rifles lifted. Soldiers had followed the band after all, choosing the wrath of a storm as their cover. A voice cut through the din, greedy and sure. There, the white woman. Garrett Pike's snarl forced the words forward as if he were throwing a rope. A wave lifted him. His left arm hung useless, and red streaks washed from his sleeve. "Chayton!" she shouted, and grabbed for his good arm. The flood tried to take both of them. She angled her body the way he had taught her in a fast stream, and let the force push them toward a cluster of boulders. They slammed the rocks, fingers scrabbling, and hauled themselves onto a slanted shelf where the water clawed and failed to reach. They crouched there, gulping air, as chaos took the canyon. Warriors who had won higher ground traded fire with soldiers scrambling from their saddles. But the storm was boss. A wall of water came on like a freight car and swept horses, packs, and a pile of lodge poles in a crush that sounded like trees snapping. "Bullet grazed," he said between breaths. "Had worse." His eyes ran the wall for any break. "There, a deer trail, steep but holds. Can you climb?" She nodded. The path was a smear up slick rock, more wish than track. They moved together. When her foot slipped, he braced. When his wounded arm faltered, she guided his weight. Their world narrowed to wet stone, breath, and the next handhold. They had gained a stretch of wall when a man scrambled across a ledge above and skidded into view. Rain plastered his hair to his skull and washed the slick shine of fury across his face. Garrett Pike had come by another route, like a bad thought finding a new door. "Got you now, girl," he roared, lifting his rifle. Chayton swung to put his body between the muzzle and Eliza, but the wound made him slow. Eliza stared at the place where he had been, breath ragged. "I killed him," she said, not sure if she spoke aloud. Chayton's good hand found her shoulder and anchored her back to the rock under her feet. "You saved us," he said. "We keep moving." "Let me see," Eliza said, already tearing a strip from her skirt. Chayton leaned against the wall and let her work. The bullet had raked the muscle high on the arm and taken a mean bite. No bone, no artery, pain and blood, but life. She cleaned with water pooled in a hollow and bound with the leather scents Leah Morningbird had hammered into her hands. The work steadied her. "You are trembling," Chayton said when she tied off the bandage. "You protected us," he said. "There is no shame in surviving the way the world requires." She waited for guilt to rise and found something else instead. A hard, clean calm. "I thought I would feel wrong," she said. "I do not. Does that mean I am wicked?" "It means you are alive," he said, taking her hand. "He would have killed us both and dragged you back to a life of pain. You chose life over death. The Great Spirit does not punish those who defend what must be kept safe." The storm softened one thin measure at a time. Gunfire came in stray cracks and then went to silence. The flood still ran hard, but no longer with the rage of a fresh bruise. They were cut from the band, two souls on a ledge with a small cave and the night on their hands. "We wait until the water gives back the canyon," he said. "They are strong. They are smart. Most will have found height." He said it, but worry pulled across his features all the same. Cold moved in when the rain lost its force. The air took heat from wet clothes and skin without asking. They sat close, sharing what warmth the body makes when it has worked all day and is not done yet. The feel of him near carried no threat. Even in the dark, she could tell his breath had the rough edge of pain and effort. She tucked the robe tighter around both their shoulders and let her weight lean into his side. For what? For bringing this trouble. If they had not been chasing me, they sat with the last ragged sounds of the storm. After a while, his voice came again, softer, thoughtful in a way that felt like a hand smoothing a wrinkle. When the soldiers attacked years ago, I pulled Willow Snow from our lodge, and she was already gone. I held her as her spirit left, and I could do nothing. Today you pulled me from the flood. You fought to keep breath in my body. That helps heal a place I thought would not mend. She turned toward the shape of him in shadow. You have saved me more times than I can count, she said. Today we saved each other. That is the way it should be. Strength is meant to be shared, or it halves itself. He let out a breath that sounded like relief had found a small seat. Yes. At some hour that felt like the middle of the world. Chayton shifted. Does the arm hurt much? She asked. Pain is a teacher, he said. It keeps me awake when I must keep watch. Then he was quiet for a time and spoke again. The day I met you on the prairie, I promised myself to hold back parts of my life. Grief and I had a long agreement. Today I learned that making room for someone else does not steal from what I have lost. It makes space for what comes next. Dawn took longer than it should have, but it came. The canyon floor still ran mean, a backwash of branches and broken gear spinning in circles where the current hit rock. The soldiers were gone, or quiet, or upstream licking wounds. The band would have climbed and scattered along ledges and cracks and caves like this one. Smoke from a rash fire would betray anyone, so no one was so foolish. By mid-morning, the water had dropped enough that a careful descent could be made. They moved slow, testing each step, staying to the darker rock where the grip was better. The flood had torn the canyon into a new shape. It would never look the same again. They reached the bottom and crossed where the water made a better friend. On the far side, the deer trail Eliza had seen earlier climbed the wall in a series of smart choices. They took it. They found the others by midday. A cry went up and folded back down into quiet joy, so as not to carry. Leah Morningbird ran the last few yards with tears in her eyes and then laughed at herself for crying. We thought the water kept you, she said, gripping Eliza and then turning to thump her brother's good shoulder and scold him for making everyone worry. When she saw the bandage, she clicked her tongue and fetched Azure Shell Woman with her kit. News moved around the circle that fed the camp. Some horses lost. Some stores gone. No children taken. The count of hurts and the count of blessings were made side by side. The soldiers had suffered too, when the flood took the lowest ground. The storm had not taken sides. It had only reminded every living thing that the land makes the last decision. When the medicine woman finished cleaning and wrapping the wound proper, Chayton sat back and let the pain drain through his jaw. Eliza held his hand steady and whispered, No cage, not for either of us, only bonds we choose. He squeezed once, and the look in his eyes told a future in plain words, without speaking. I used to think strength meant holding still, while someone else decided, Eliza said. Today I learned strength can be the hand that throws, the arm that pulls, the choice that says yes to life. Chayton turned his head, the last light carving the lines of his cheek. We save each other, he said again, as if the words were a vow they could both lean on. Then he added the part she had not known she needed. And we keep choosing it, tomorrow and the next day, when the storm has long left and the ground is quiet again. Even with rain still dripping from the ledges and gunpowder ghosts clinging to the air, a quiet settled over Eliza's heart that felt earned. She had not survived by bowing her head. She had fought for the shape of her own life and felt it take hold. The cave hummed with the slow hush that follows thunder. Chayton Redhawk leaned against stone with his arm bandaged and his eyes steady on her, as if the storm had burned away everything that did not matter. "When the waters ease," she asked softly, "what comes next? There will be other patrols. Men like Garrett Pike will not be the last." The thought struck cold and sharp. "After all we have crossed, you would have me leave. Do you want that?" "No." The answer leapt out of him, quick and sure, before tempering to a gentler tone. "No, I will never hold you by my wanting. Choice must be free, or it is only another cage." Eliza pictured Mercy Gulch with its narrow streets and narrower mercy. She pictured Abel Hart's grip, the press of church windows, the dead certainty in Garrett Pike's eyes. Then the images shifted. She saw Leah Morningbird's laughter, Chief Iron Bear's pride when he called her Feather Woman, the careful patience in Chayton's lessons, the way he listened before speaking. The truth rose clean in her. In the dark she heard, more than saw, the smile that lived in his answer. "My fierce eagle woman." They talked through the night in low voices, keeping watch in turns, sharing stories to keep fear from nesting. When dawn finally washed Redwind Canyon in pale gold and showed the wreckage left by water and men, they were ready to climb toward whatever waited. The river had dropped and left its bad mood smeared along the banks. Here and there were prints leading away up the walls, sign that the band had found height. No bluecoats in sight. The soldiers had let the flood choose for them and then retreated. Eliza and Chayton descended with care, crossed where the current ran safer, and followed the scraped marks that pointed toward Stone Table Plateau. By evening, the story had traveled around the cook fires. People looked at Eliza differently now, not as a stranger taken in out of pity, but as someone who had paid in courage and blood. That night, in a safer fold of land, a healer stitched Chayton's arm with practiced care. Eliza held his hand and steadied his breathing when pain rose like a wave. "No cage," she whispered as the needle bit. "Not for either of us. We tie only the knots we choose." His fingers closed over hers in quiet agreement, and in that grip lay a promise for every tomorrow that would test them. The moon turned and turned again. Autumn settled its copper hand on the hills. By the time the band pinned down a semi-permanent camp in a sheltered valley, cavalry columns had lost interest in chasing one woman across the High Plains territory. Winter winds would soon rule the roads. Eliza worked outside the lodge she still shared with Leah, the two of them side by side with tasks that used to feel foreign and now felt like the shape of a day. She stitched a pair of winter moccasins, her beads laid in patterns that told a private story. Water and storm, a path braided from two tracks that met and parted and met again. "I am making them for Chayton," Eliza answered without looking up. "His winter pair's thin at the toe." "Of course you are," Leah teased, "like how he just happened to need new fletchings last week, or a fresh knife sheath the week before. Friends take care of one another. Friends." "Among our people there is a way to show interest," Leah said, her voice turning gentle. "A woman may prepare a favored dish, or work decorations for his things, or ask him to walk when the stars are out." She paused with meaning. Sometimes she gifts him moccasins with patterns that speak of two lives choosing to walk together. Eliza looked down at what her hands had been saying while her mouth stayed careful. The designs wove and crossed and came back to one another, a map of partnership wearing bead and thread. She swallowed against the sudden swell in her chest. That night the camp quieted. Eliza found herself walking without deciding, feet carrying her toward whispering aspen grove where the leaves talk even without much wind. Chayton stood at the edge of the trees with his back to her, watching the first stars arrive. He turned when she came close. "I am not cold," she answered, "though the air bit. I have something for you." She held out the moccasins, the beads catching moonlight like drops of water on stone. He took them with care, turning each one in his good hand. As his eyes traced the patterns, understanding moved across his face, like light passing a hillside. "These are made with skill," he said slowly, "and they say more than color and line." Chayton set the moccasins down on a folded blanket as if they were medicine. He stepped closer but stopped just beyond reach, the way he always gave her room to decide the space between them. "Eliza," he said, using her white name the way he did when the ground of a moment mattered. "You know what lives in my chest. You have known for some time, but I promise to never let my wants become your chain." She drew a breath that filled all the way. "I know your heart," she said back, "and I know my own. Fear no longer speaks for me. I will not be owned. I will not be caged. If I choose you, it is because I wish a partner, not a keeper." "Leah will call the whole valley to help," Eliza said with a small smile. "She has been nudging me toward this path for weeks. She is a skilled nudger," he admitted. His control finally cracked into a laugh that lived low in his chest. Then he mastered it again, not from coldness, but from care. "Will you allow me to court you properly for a few days, the way our elders taught us? Gifts to your family, time among witnesses, promises spoken where they can stand." "My family is here," Eliza said. "Chief Iron Bear has stood in the place where a father might stand and done it with honor. Leah has guarded me like a sister. Bring your gifts to them." The word claim once would have tightened Eliza's throat. Tonight it felt like a circle drawn by two hands at once. They walked back into camp together, not hiding and not hurrying. People looked up and smiled the kind of smile that says a story has turned a page everyone was waiting for. Leah clapped once and then bit her knuckle to keep from making noise. Elder Riversong nodded as if the stars had finally taken the place he knew they would. Days of courting followed, brief and bright. Chayton brought 2 fine ponies to Chief Iron Bear, not as payment, but as a sign that he could provide and share. He laid a stack of beautifully tanned hides before Leah and thanked her for keeping Eliza safe and for teasing at the exact right moments. He sought out the widows and elders with small gifts and strong hands for chores that had waited. He hunted with the men and returned with meat, offering the first cuts to the grandmothers, as custom required. Each act said, "I am not only asking for a wife, I am joining a people." On the 4th evening, the camp gathered near Whispering Aspen Grove, where the ground made a natural circle. A new lodge had been raised by many hands, a wedding gift set side by side with Chayton's family lodge. Smoke from cooking fires drifted light and sweet. Children squirmed and were hushed. The air held a pleasant weight, like the sky waiting to spill rain that everyone hoped for. Chief Iron Bear stepped into the center with the dignity of a man who had stood through hard times and good without bending the wrong way. He spoke in Lakota, and Chayton translated in English so Eliza could hear each word in both worlds. The chief told of finding a white woman at the edge of camp who asked for sanctuary and paid for it with work and respect. He spoke of the day she faced her father and claimed her own life in front of all. He recalled the flood and the fight and the way she pulled a warrior from the river and stood between him and death. He said a woman who chooses like that is already family in the deepest way. He raised his hand, and the circle hushed even more. Eliza and Chayton stepped forward. There were no rings. There were blankets woven by grandmothers and held for this day. There were 2 strings of beads, one placed around Eliza's neck by Leah with tears and laughter tangled together, one placed around Chayton's neck by an uncle who had seen too much war to waste any piece. There were vows spoken plain enough to live by. Chayton said, "I will keep your spirit safe and your body safe. I will listen before I speak. I will remember that your yes must always be free." Eliza said, "I will keep your spirit safe and your body safe. I will speak truth even when it is hard. I will remember that love is not a cage, but a place to rest." Later, under the first stars, Eliza and Chayton stood at the doorway of the lodge the people had built for them. He touched the edge of the door flap and then let his hand fall, waiting for her to take the first step. She did. Inside, warmth from a small fire breathed against the cool. Robes were spread. The scent of sage and fresh cedar hung in the air like a blessing. Eliza turned to him and saw not the warrior who faced rifles, but the man who had promised to die before he would hurt her and had proved it in 100 small ways. "I used to think that joining meant losing," she said. "Losing voice, losing self. Tonight it feels like gaining room to be more of who I am." They crossed that threshold together, not rushing, not afraid. The night outside went on singing its prairie songs. The lodge held a softer music. Eliza learned what it was to be wanted without being consumed, to give and receive with ease, to let trust guide where fear used to rule. The words her mother had spoken long ago about duty and endurance dissolved like sugar in warm tea. In their place grew the knowledge that intimacy can be a conversation where both voices matter. Morning came gold and new. They stepped out to the sound of camp waking. Leah called them to eat with a joke about how married people still had chores. Eliza laughed and took her place among the women for the morning work, not above it and not below it. She moved through familiar tasks with a new center of gravity, one that balanced her own choice and the weight of a shared life. Winter would come on hard. Soldiers might return when the wind softened. The nation pressing from the east would not pause for one camp's happiness. But today, the land had room. Today, the people moved like a single creature made of many hearts. Today, Eliza Hart wore beads that spoke of a choice freely made and walked in moccasins that had been tied with her own hands. She had been tested by flood and gun and fear. She had not shattered. She had opened. At dusk, Elder River Song called for stories. One by one voices offered hunts and lessons and laughter. When he turned to Eliza, the circle quieted. She told of a girl who ran from a house that called itself safe and felt the earth take her feet and give them back stronger. She told of a warrior who kept his promises in small hours and large storms. She told of throwing a rock when there was no other way, and of holding a hand when that was the only medicine. She finished with the simplest truth of all. Freedom is not the absence of ties. It is the presence of ties you choose. The elders nodded. The children looked at her with wide eyes, storing away a version of courage they might one day need. Chayton sat beside her with his injured arm resting and his good hand on his knee. Fingers relaxed, his whole body speaking a language that meant home. Eliza had known Chayton's heart for many moons, but hearing him say he would die before he caused her harm set a firm stone inside her. She stepped closer, closing the space that had always been hers to measure. "You have kept those promises," she said. "I am not the woman you found bleeding on the prairie. I have faced floods and rifles. I have taken a life to keep you breathing. I found my strength. Now I want to learn what waits on the far side of fear. "Be certain," he said. His voice was rough at the edges. "I have waited. I can wait longer." He closed the last few inches between them and set his palm along her cheek as if it were something sacred. "What do you choose, feather woman?" "You. I choose you, not to hide behind you, but to walk beside you, not because you saved me, but because you let me save myself." "You have been courting me since we met," Eliza said, smiling. "Every lesson, every patient hour, every time you looked at me as a person and not a thing." "Your healing is new," he cautioned. "I fear rushing and breaking what has just set." "Then do not rush," she said, lifting her hand to his face so her touch answered his. "But do not hold back either. Show me what it is to be wanted without being consumed. Teach me the way you taught me to read tracks and listen for water. And I have loved you since you wrapped my torn feet at Cottonwood Run," she answered. "Gentle warrior who gives without taking. I did not know love could be free of dread until you showed me." They stood like that until their hearts found a single rhythm. Then he drew back a little and the gravity returned to his face. "If we join our paths, it must be plain and open. You deserve a wedding with witnesses to our choice. My sister sees more than most," he said, and a true smile broke across his mouth. "Will you let me court you proper? There will be night walks. There will be excuses to sit close while the elders tell stories. Many," he promised when she asked. "And I will wear your moccasins so all will know I belong to you," he laughed then. A full sound the camp did not hear often, and they walked back hand in hand. Warriors nodded. Women traded knowing looks. Leah clapped once before covering her mouth. That night Eliza lay under her robe and felt anticipation like a soft drum under the skin. Out in the men's circle she could hear Chayton's voice, low and patient, likely taking good-natured teasing about new footwear. Morning carried the first flakes of frost across Stone Table Plateau. Chayton found her at sunrise and wrapped her in his arms. "Any regrets?" he asked at her ear. "Only that the road was long to reach this right place," she said, leaning back into him. The night had been everything he had promised and everything she had not known to hope for. He had read her breath the way he read a trail, never pressing where there was resistance, always listening for the yes that was hers to give. She discovered that closeness could be a conversation where both voices mattered. She understood at last what her mother had never known how to teach. "You have changed so much from the woman I found in the grass," he said. "I have become who I was under the fear," she answered. "You did not change me. You gave me room to change myself." Azure Shell Woman worked alongside Eliza as they broke down the lodge. "You are truly one of us now," the elder said. "Not by blood, by choice. The strongest ties are the ones we choose to make and hold." The words struck deep and true. Eliza thought of Abel Hart selling her future like a piece of tack. She thought of women here who had stood between her and the world, taught her with patient fingers, scolded her with love, and cheered her every small victory. Family, she learned, was not a ledger. Family was shared values and chosen loyalty. By sundown, they reached a shallow basin at the edge of the Moonridge Hills, where windbreak and water made a smart rest. Fires rose in clean columns, and the scent of sage wrapped the camp. The elders set the night watches, and the young men joked too loudly and were hushed. Eliza sat with Leah and sewed a new patch onto a worn robe. Across the fire she caught a boy staring at her with curious eyes. "You threw a rock at a man with a rifle," he said. His voice held awe. The boy's grin flashed, and he scampered off to practice with a round stone and a knot in a piece of rawhide. Leah nudged Eliza with her elbow. You have become a story already, one that includes pricked fingers and sore feet," Eliza said, smiling. She looked toward the edge of camp and found Chayton there, talking with Chief Iron Bear. The chief's posture was heavy with leadership and years, but his eyes were sharp. He motioned Eliza over. "You stood in a circle and chose our nephew and our ways," Chief Iron Bear said when she joined them. "That choice brings honor. It also brings duty. When we travel as one body. A hurt in the foot is felt at the shoulder. You understand?" The chief tilted his head toward a wagon whose axle whined. The old couple driving it had seen too many winters. Their gear was balanced wrong, and the weight stole their momentum. Eliza handed her sewing to Leah and crossed to the wagon. She pulled the bundles down and repacked the load, tucking the heaviest closest to the axle, tying the rope at angles that kept the sway out. The old man watched and nodded approval without many words. When the wagon rolled again, it moved cleaner. Eliza stepped back and felt something new. It was not pride in being praised. It was the steady satisfaction of being of use. That night the elders called for quiet talk rather than songs. The flood and the fight had taken breath out of the band, and they were saving the bigger joy for a day when the world did not feel so near at their backs. Chayton and Eliza walked the line between the lodges. Above them, the sky spread its cold stars, and below them small voices in the sleeping camp rose and fell. They passed Elder Riversong, sitting on a folded robe at the edge of the firelight. He lifted 2 fingers in blessing, and Eliza answered in kind. "I remember thinking the dark could not hurt me any more if you were seated in it," she said. "It is the same now," he said. "The dangers have not vanished, but they have lost their hold on the inside of things." Chief Iron Bear walked forward with Chayton at his side and Eliza a few steps behind. The woman stepped out from the settlers with a baby on her chest. Her face held the thin pride of someone who has had to be proud without help for too long. "We are headed toward Fort Gray Rock," the woman said. "Our axle broke yesterday. We mean no harm." The chief listened. He spoke a few words to Chayton, and Chayton answered Eliza quietly. "We will help enough to keep them alive, and no more. We will not take on their whole burden." He turned back to the settlers. "We will mend your axle and show you a safer crossing. Then your road is your own. Why did we stop?" The boy from last night asked Eliza as they walked. "They are not our people, because the land teaches us to leave things better than we found them when it costs us little," she said. "We keep moving. We do not gather trouble to our chest, but we do not harden our hearts either." Toward evening, they reached a rise where the prairie opened in a wide plain, and the sky felt big enough to hold anything. Far off, a brown river of life moved south. The bison herds the scouts had promised. The whole band seemed to breathe deeper at the sight. Food and hides and bone tools and winter fires were written in that motion. They camped along a low ridge that broke the wind, and they made a circle tighter than usual. Chayton's arm was nearly healed, but Eliza still checked the scar when he shrugged off his shirt to wash. The mark did not shame him. It did not scare her. It said we were there and we lived. Later, around the quiet fire, Chief Iron Bear spoke about the coming days. "We will take what the herd offers and not a hoof more." He said, "We will leave enough to live again. We will watch for soldiers. We will pay attention to the wind. We will keep our children close and our tempers closer. We will remember that our strength is in choosing together." Eliza lay down in the lodge she now shared with Chayton and listened to the night. Dogs shifted, horses blew. Somewhere a baby Fuston was soothed. She thought about mornings in Mercy Gulch when night sounds had meant fear. Now they meant life. She reached for Chayton's hand in the dark. "You are awake," he whispered. He lifted her hand to his lips. "Then let us keep making them right," he said. "Let us keep our promises where no one is watching." The wind traced the hide walls and moved along. Eliza closed her eyes with the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would meet it side by side. The trail ahead might turn hard again. Fort Gray Rock might send a new detachment in the thaw. Mercy Gulch might trade new rumors about a woman who ran. But the deep work was already done. She had stepped out of the old cage and found her name in a people who called her sister. She had taken a warrior's hand and kept her own. She had learned that freedom was not only running from something, it was walking towards something with someone who would never ask her to be smaller than she was. By midday, the people set out along paths their grandparents had known in every season. The line of lodges and ponies moved with a steady sway, dust rising in a soft ribbon behind them. Eliza Hart rode beside Chayton Redhawk on the pony gifted to her at the wedding. The animal stepped sure and light and carried her as if the two had grown up together. They crested a roll of prairie, and the land opened wide. Grass shimmered like a gold sea cross stitched with wild flowers. A sky so large it seemed to hold the whole world arched over them. "It is beautiful," Eliza breathed, and the words felt too small for what her eyes were taking in. Eliza heard the weight behind his voice. Each year brought more wagons, more soldiers, more talk of towns that would rise where buffalo once slept. The life she had found here was strong, but not untouchable. Still, she set her shoulders. "Whatever comes, we meet it together." Chayton reached and took her hand. "Together," he said, and the simple word felt like a promise big enough for the horizon. They stopped that evening by a clear stream that curled out of a stand of cottonwoods. Water, shelter, good sight lines. The lessons Chayton had taught her now lived in her bones. She helped raise their lodge, and her hands knew the work without thinking. Her body had hardened in useful ways. Her mind had widened to fit 2 languages and a dozen new skills. After the meal, when stars began to prick the dimming sky, Elder River Song called for stories. One by one, people spoke of hunts and mistakes and the small flashes of wisdom that keep a camp alive. Once the attention of a circle would have made Eliza shrink inside herself. Now she sat taller and let her voice carry. She told of a woman who had been taught that walls meant safety and chains meant love. She told how the cage had grown too small and the chains too heavy, and how running had been the first true prayer she had ever spoken. She told of a warrior who treated strength as a shelter and not a weapon. She spoke of learning the trail with her eyes and her hands, of working hides and pounding roots, of facing a father who claimed ownership and saying no with all the air in her lungs. She spoke of flood and gunfire, of pulling a man she loved from roaring water, of being pulled in return from the place inside where fear kept house. She ended with the lesson that had come cleanest. Freedom is not only what you run from, it is what you choose every day. Silence settled after she finished, the good kind that means words landed where they should. Then nods and quiet agreement moved like wind across tall grass. The story passed into the keeping of the people. They loved one another, as if the long miles of loneliness before this night could be turned to warmth. Eliza, who had once believed a woman's duty was to endure, asked for what she wanted and gave what she wished to give. She learned again that closeness could be a conversation and not a conquest. After they lay and listened to the sounds that meant safety, a dog shifting, a baby settling, the low voices of those on watch, home sounds. I used to dream of escape, Eliza said into the quiet. Now I dream of staying. I see children running free on this grass. I see years that make us both wiser. I see myself old and laughing while teaching young hands to bead. Will they come? She asked, even though she knew. Yes. He answered with honesty that never tried to soften truth. The white world presses closer each year, but we have outlived hard seasons before. We will do it again. Eliza thought of the road from Mercy Gulch to this bed. Every step had demanded courage. The first desperate flight, the days of hunger, the terror of being found, the flood in the cliff, the quiet risk of learning to trust. Then we will face what comes as we face everything, she said, side by side, no cages, only bonds we choose. The next morning the camp stirred early. Word had come from scouts that the herds were moving south in great number. The band would follow as they had for generations, taking only what they needed and giving thanks for the rest. Eliza moved among the women with practiced ease. Poles fell and hides rolled. Cooking stones were lifted and bundled. Children were coaxed into traveling patience with bites of dried fruit. A few of the older women watched Eliza at her work and exchanged glances of pleased approval. This white woman had learned. She had stood and fought. She had made their Chayton smile again after long grief. Azure Shell Woman spoke as they tied the last bundle. Oh, you are one of us by the strength of your choice. Blood is a river. Choice is a bridge you built with your own hands. Eliza carried those words like a warm stone in her pocket as they rode. By midday the caravan found its rhythm. Hooves and footsteps, wheels and voices, the soft clatter of a traveling village. A young boy trotted beside Eliza's pony and looked up at her with shining eyes. You are the woman who threw a rock at a man with a rifle, he said, half question and half legend. I am, Eliza said, hands light on the reins. I missed many times in practice before I hit what I aimed at. Breath, patience, try again. The boy nodded, already searching the ground for a smooth stone. Morning broke clean. The hunt that day went well. The men rode out, and Chayton among them, while the women prepared the grounds and sharpened tools. Eliza joined the work that followed success. Meat hung and smoked. Hides were stretched. Bones were set aside for tools. Fat was rendered and carefully stored. She stood elbow to elbow with Leah Morningbird and two Anis, while their hands did what many hands had done before. The camp hummed with the right kind of labor, useful and shared. In the afternoon, a dust plume to the east set watchful eyes to narrowing. Scouts moved out and returned with word. A small patrol from Fort Grey Rock kept to the far ridge, counting lodges and horses and faces, then turned away. The tension in the camp tightened and then eased. Eliza let out the breath she had been holding and saw that Chayton had done the same. The world pressed, then passed on. For now, later in their lodge, Chayton and Eliza lay awake and traced the day in soft voices. We are building a life, she said, not with grand gestures, but with 1,000 small choices. The way we share meat with a widow, the way we thank the herd, the way we speak to each other when we are tired. He lifted her hand and pressed it to his chest. Let us keep those choices true, he said, especially when no one is watching. Days turned like pages. The band shadowed the herds. Work filled the hours. There were moments of laughter and flashes of worry and a steady sense that they were exactly where they were meant to be. One evening, as frost began to lace the grasses, Azure Shell Woman set a bundle on Eliza's lap. Inside lay a small robe for a future child. softened and smoked to perfect comfort. Eliza ran her fingers over the bead pattern that showed two lines crossing again and again, meeting and parting and always returning to the same center. You are loved here. Azure Shell Woman said, whatever the winters bring, on a clear night under that endless sky, Elder River Song called Eliza's name once more. Will you speak, Feather Woman? Tell us what you know now you did not know when you first came to us. Eliza stood and felt the whole circle steady her. I know that fear steals the future if you let it, she said. I know that a promise kept in small hours can heal years that came before. I know that family can be chosen, and the chosen family can be the strongest kind. I know that freedom is not a door you break through once. It is a path you keep choosing at every fork. Tomorrow we will ride after the buffalo again, she finished. We will mend what breaks. We will share what we have. We will keep faith. Whatever comes from Fort Grey Rock or Mercy Gulch, or any place where paper maps pretend to own what wind owns, we will meet it as we have met everything, together. The circle breathed out as one. The wind moved through the grass like a blessing. Somewhere above, an eagle called. Eliza lifted her face and listened. She had once run from a town that wanted to decide her future for her. Now she rode toward each day with a partner and a people who asked only that she bring her whole self and keep her word. At its core, this story isn't only about the Wild West. It's about what it means to choose, even when life tries to take that choice away. Many of us, especially with years behind us, know what it feels like to be trapped by duty, by expectation, or by fear. Eliza's journey reminds us that freedom is not the absence of hardship, but the presence of decisions we make every day. She found courage not in being rescued, but in standing as an equal partner, proving that dignity comes from choosing bonds freely rather than living under cages of control. For those of us with 6 or more decades of living, it is a gentle reminder it's never too late to claim our voice, to walk beside those who respect us, and to teach the next generation that love without freedom is no love at all. We may not face soldiers on horseback, but we all face storms of another kind, illness, loss, or change. In every storm, we still have the power to choose how we meet it, with fear or with courage, alone or together. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and walking this journey together. Your presence means more than words can say. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us keep these stories alive and bring you more tales of love, courage, and freedom.